Hi, I'm Ms. Sloan, and this is a video for AP Biology students, and this is all about Chapter 45, Community and Ecosystem Ecology. And this video right here is part 2. I've already done part 1. You want to remind yourself to look over the learning objectives of the College Board. This follows 8.2 and 8.5. You could pause and read through all of these and make sure that you're good with them. In video 1, I discussed community structure, community interactions, and community development. So here in part 2, we're going to discuss the dynamics of an ecosystem. All right, so for my students, I give them group shared notes. Those are located down in the descriptor of this video. And there are 2 columns. Column 1 is the scaffolding. I'll help you out filling those notes in. Column 2, I encourage my students to put in pictures and images that are helpful. Okay, and I'm going to get a pointer real quick as I move myself closer to the elephant, and you can read through that definition. Good. All right, so what an ecosystem is, and this one is according to National Geographic, right? It's all the organisms, how they interact with each other and with the environment. Remember, the environment, right, is going to be those abiotic factors and biotic factors that they're interacting with. So in the introduction on the notes, we're starting at 45.3 because we already did 45.1 and 2 in video 1 underneath the dynamics. So make sure you might want to highlight in them. All ecosystems include abiotic non-living components such as the atmosphere, water, and soil, and biotic living components. And then the living components are broken down into autotrophs and heterotrophs. So autotrophs have the ability to take the inorganic molecules and make them organic, to take inorganic CO2 and make sugars. And then heterotrophs can consume those sugars. Now, will the autotrophs be consuming those sugars too? Yes, because who does cellular respiration? All cells, right? All cells need to do cellular respiration in order to generate ATP, and they need a source of organic molecules to do that. Autotrophs, phototrophs, use light in order to produce those sugars. So they will capture that energy and make it available for the rest of the food web to use when they do cellular respiration. Now, in water, you might find things like algae. On land, you could plants and trees, but there are also chemoautotrophs. Chemoautotrophs are certain types of bacteria found in cave communities or at hydrothermal vents, and they don't have any light, right? So to be an autotroph, what they'll do is they'll break the bonds of something like hydrogen sulfide and release the energy out of those bonds in order to have the energy to fix CO2 into sugar. So on your autotrophs producers notes, all you need is use chlorophyll and light to do photosynthesis, and then I give you everything for chemoautotrophs. All right, now heterotrophs, they cannot make their own food and they have to feed on other organisms. So there are many different types of heterotrophs, but they are collectively called consumers because they need to consume organic nutrients, and you are a fine example of a consumer. So primary consumers, now, this is not like, oh, I'm a vegetarian, so I'm a primary consumer. That is a food choice that you have, right, that you prefer. Now, you are biologically an omnivore. You can choose just to eat vegetable matter, but I'll explain to you why you are an omnivore. Just put a pin in that for now. But what biological herbivores are is they eat mainly plants. And I don't want you to just think plants, but think seeds and roots and bark, right, and pollen. Those are all considered herbivores. And on your notes for heterotrophs, you already have this. Herbivores are known as primary consumers because they're the first kind of consumer you have, okay, is a primary consumer. And you are feeding on producers. So rabbits and elephants, those are primary consumers. Now, secondary consumers feed on primary consumers. They feed on other animals. And here's a whole example of some secondary consumers. So think about this. If a secondary consumer eats a primary consumer, then what do you call something that would eat a secondary consumer? You would call them a tertiary consumer, right? Now, In this situation, I jumped ahead. Sorry, let me click on this for you. You have producers, you have it represented here with your plants, and here you have part of an herbivore, and here you have a carnivore. If something ate this top predator, right, then it could be a tertiary consumer. Here's a better example. Here's a snake. It's a tertiary consumer who eats a frog, who is a secondary consumer, who might eat a fly, who is a primary consumer. If depending on what this snake eats, you could either be a primary, secondary, or tertiary. It depends, right, on who's eating whom. But they are all consumers. On your notes, the next one is omnivore, which is what you are biologically. You feed on both plant and animal material. Now, how do I know you're an omnivore? By your dentition and by the length of your intestines. Your dentition, you have incisors for cutting and tearing meat, and you have broad, flat molars for grinding away plant material to break those cell walls to get access to the nutrients. Your intestines. If you are a herbivore, you need really long intestines because it's actually kind of hard to process and get at all the nutrients in plants. If you are a carnivore, you can have shorter intestines, and guess what? We have intermediate intestines, which follows that plan of being an omnivore. Now, if you choose to eat differently, if you want to be an herbivore or kind of carnivore, more power to you. I just wanted to tell you what you are biologically. So omnivore eat both plants and animals. And yes, I made that cake right there. Okay, decomposers next. So they consume or eat or absorb dead plants and animals, and they will return them. Remember, nutrients cycle and energy flows like from the sun. So they'll break them back down so that they can be used by the producers again, primarily. So these fungi and bacteria are all decomposers. Now, detritivores eat detritus, which is dead stuff or pee or poo or things like that, and recycle that. That would be very typical, like in a cave community. So on your notes, you have it all. I gave it to you underneath decomposers. Okay, but you could read through it and highlight some keywords there. All right, we're going to move on. We're going to now discuss how energy flows now that we know all the players. So we're going to talk about how that energy moves through each of them. So energy flow, it always starts with the sun. The big yellow one is the sun. And you want to think back to your laws of thermodynamics. Remember, the first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can just change forms. And then every time it changes forms, you lose some as heat. So it's not 100% efficient. So I gave you that first part already in your notes. And so I want you to take a look at this. So energy flows and nutrients cycle. So let's see that. The orange arrows show you the way the energy is flowing from the sun, from the producers to the consumers, right? Primary and secondary consumers, maybe tertiary consumers. Then both producers and consumers, right? Now we're talking nutrients because we are able, the sun or photoautotrophs can use the sun's energy to take inorganic molecules and make them organic, right? Now we're talking nutrients. Decomposers can work on both the producers and on the consumers and return those nutrients to this inorganic pool, which then the sun can use the sun's energy to take these inorganic molecules and make them organic again. Every time it changes forms, you lose some as heat, right? And how do you know that? The second law of thermodynamics. Now, a food chain will show you. This looks like an orange, but it's supposed to be a sun. I'm going to pretend I'm the sun. Okay. A food chain starts with the sun. It goes to the producers. Put a pin in that because I will give you an exception to when it doesn't start with the sun. It goes to producers. And then here, this would be your primary consumer, right? Your secondary consumer. And this food chain shows a single pathway of nutrients. So on food chain, a single pathway of energy flow, a single pathway. Now, a food web, okay, shows all the possible pathways. And this is more like reality, right? So you could have several different organisms that are going to eat this bug or this worm, right? And so we can see that if you take one thing out, right, if you took out this bird, you can see how it would impact several different populations within this community. So on Food Web, various interconnecting paths of energy flow, and it's very complex. This is a very simple one that's shown here, but it is more realistic than a food chain because organisms usually depend on more than one food source. But in actuality, it looks more like this. Now, taking a look at this picture, can you see one organism that is super, super important to this ecosystem when you look at the food web? And hopefully you can see this right here. Look at the krill and how critical that is for this entire ecosystem. So it's very complex. Now, a grazing food web, well, what does that sound like? Grazing, right? You're grazing on plant material. So a grazing food web begins with things like leaves and stems and photoautotrophs is basically where it's starting at, okay, with herbivores. But you can also have a detrital food web. A detrital food web would be one that starts, like, say, in a cave community with detritus or dead stuff, and it's moving through this food chain. The two can overlap as well. So you can have the detrital food web overlap with the grazing food web. So for instance, you can see this beetle is eaten in both food webs, okay, in both. So you have all of that already provided for you in your notes. All right, next we're going to discuss trophic levels. So you can see a single food chain here just for the purposes of simplicity. So here's your producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. What I don't like about this picture is it looks like only the fungi only breaks down the hawk. In reality, in this model, they should have drawn a line from the snake and the grasshopper and the grass all to the decomposer because it's always going to return it, right? Now, each time, remember the second law of thermodynamics says each time it changes hands, right, that you always lose a little bit of that energy as heat. Not all of the energy is going to get transferred through, maybe only about 10% each time. So if you identify them, okay, as trophic levels, think about trough, like what's in your trough. If there's only plants in your trough, in your bowl, that's you're eating at the first trophic level. This is if you're eating primary consumers, you're eating at the second trophic level. Secondary consumers, you're eating at the third trophic level, and tertiary consumers, you're eating at the fourth trophic level. And so on your trophic levels, I gave you all the notes for that too. So you got it all. All right, now, the trophic levels in this diagram are indicated by these Roman numerals. So if you would think about the plants, notice right here, they're number 1 on the trophic level, okay? And then if this mouse is an herbivore, not a carnivorous mouse, but if he is an herbivore, right, he is eating the first trophic level, and then he would be available here at the second trophic level. The snake would be at the third trophic level. All right, now, if you stack up your trophic levels, you will get what's called an ecological pyramid, So on your notes where it says ecological pyramid, one thing we want to know, let me show you this next one. Remember what I said, only about 10% gets passed on to the next level. Why? Because this organism, he's going to do cellular respiration, he's going to lose some to heat. He's going to pee, he's going to poo, right? So he's contributing detritus. He's going to use some of that energy, right, running around. So of all the energy he takes in from the plants, of all the plant material he eats as an herbivore, only about 10% of what he consumes gets taken to the next level at the carnivore. So you can see, I'm going to go back one now. When you look at this pyramid is not a good model the way it is drawn because only 10% gets passed on each time. So you need a very steep pyramid. And even this one, take a look at it. Do you think this is a good model? Because ecological pyramids, we're going to use them. We just need to see the downsides of them. This bottom block represents autotrophs. Look right here, 809. If we're looking at, let's say, energy, grams per meter squared, or surface area, right? Grams per meter squared. The next block, only about 10% gets passed on. This says 37 grams. This is 809. If your block was just half as big, it would be 400. What's this number? 37, right? So maybe this is not a good drawing because it should be so much smaller. And then this one, 11, and this one, the top carnivore, 1.5. So on your basics, you want to put in the thing on your notes, only 10% of the energy on average is incorporated into the next level. So that's why you usually only see about 3 to 4 layers or link. And it's not always a good model when they represent it like this, because only about 10% gets passed on. And also, what's missing from this model that would interact on all levels? Do you know what's missing? Decomposers are missing, right? Because decomposers would work on all of these organisms. All right. So this is just another one. You can see that one. And here's yet one more. And I like this one because it still isn't the right on percentages, nor decomposers. But you can see producers. Here's your herbivore, primary carnivores, secondary carnivores. Here it's breaking it down by consumers. Primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumers, and then we can take it another level. This is the first trophic level, second trophic level, third trophic level, and fourth trophic level. So I wanted to kind of put it all together for you. Now, there are exceptions to each. Let's talk about the exceptions. First of all, the pyramid of numbers, okay? If you do a pyramid of numbers, that's assuming you have more blades of grass, right, than you do herbivores. And you would have more herbivores than you have carnivores, and you would have more primary carnivores than secondary carnivores, and it's showing you that numerically in this particular diagram. But you could have a single tree with millions of ants on it that are herbivores. So the pyramid of numbers does not always work. So the pyramid of numbers, if that's how you organized it, would be decreasing numbers at each level. Another way to do it is pyramid of biomass, because if you just weighed all of the producers, which is what this one, I believe, now that I'm thinking about it, was doing, okay, grams per meter squared, that if you weighed all of them, all of the autotrophs would weigh more than all of the herbivores, than all of the carnivores. And for the most part, that works. But the best one to do would be like a pyramid of energy, that this one has more energy, then this one has a little less energy, and this one has a little bit less. There are also exceptions to that rule, because sometimes you have algae who can produce a lot of sugars to support a large number of herbivores, So the best one would be a pyramid of energy based on energy content, less energy at each level. Okay, now let's do the second part of this video, which will be about biogeochemical cycles. So when we discuss the cycles, you may want to add this into your notes underneath chemical cycling. They're all going to start with producers taking in inorganic nutrients. That's true. But there are 3 words that I will use every once in a while. The reservoir is usually where it is stored, and it may not be available to producers. Where the producers can get at it and access it would be the exchange pool. Let me give you an example for that. Phosphorus, the reservoir for phosphorus is in rocks. If it's buried in those rocks, plants can't get at it. But due to weathering, then that phosphorus can get washed down into a body of water, and then the producers could have access to it. Then that would be the exchange pool. And as it moves through living organisms, that would be the community. So you may want to add that at the last part there of chemical cycling, where it says chemicals will be recycled and used again. And then you can add in reservoir, exchange pool, and community. Reservoir, exchange pool, and community. So a stable ecosystem can remain indefinitely because the mineral nutrients are recycled through the food chain, producer, consumer, decomposer, etc. And then you always have energy input coming from the sun, and then that energy is passed through your food webs. Now, who can mess up those ecosystems? We can. And so as we go through each one of these biogeochemical cycles, I'm going to let you know about man's impact on those biogeochemical cycles. All right, so we're going to start with the water cycle. And I bet you guys are all very comfortable with the water cycle. You know we need water. You know we're mostly made out of water. And here are all the places that water can be found: lakes, rivers, ponds, aquifers, right? Underground, rain coming from the sky. What you really need to know is that the fresh water that living organisms need, of all the water on the earth, only 3% of it is fresh water, right? Only 3%. And most of that is found in glaciers and is inaccessible. We do not want to melt these glaciers, right? We need these glaciers. But that's where most of the fresh water is located. And so on your notes, you can skip down underneath water cycle where it says human activities. Only 3% of the world's water is fresh water. Okay, so here's just a quick review of the water cycle. We can go over a couple of words here. You have evaporation off of bodies of water, organisms, right? You know, surface runoff. I am looking for transpiration in this picture. And is it here? Oh, here we go. Evapotranspiration. This would be from plants, right? When it goes out their open stomata. So that's on your notes there. Transpiration, evaporation of water from plants. And then I want you to know that aquifers are underground bodies of water. Then you see groundwater storage right here. How we mess up this cycle, you got it. We pollute it, okay? So underneath human activities, when I told you only 3% of the world's water is fresh water, oftentimes we pollute it or we remove it. Here's some more polluting. Or we remove it through groundwater mining. And that can lead to what's called sinkholes, because that water, if you think of like a waterbed and it's supporting you above it, if that water drains out of your waterbed, you will collapse. So the aquifers can be supporting layers of earth above them. And so if you drain it, it's going to sink and it's going to fall, causing problems. All right, next let's talk about the carbon cycle. When you talk about the carbon cycle, you need to talk about these 4 items right here. And it really, we're bringing in oxygen as well, okay? So when you think about breathing, keep in mind, only about 20% of the gases that we are breathing in is oxygen. Most of it, what we're breathing in, is nitrogen gas, which we can't do anything with, and I'll talk to you about that cycle in a minute. But of these 4 items, photosynthesis, respiration, that's referring to cellular respiration, combustion is like burning, like industry, and decomposers, of these 4, which ones remove CO2 from the air? And hopefully you recognize only one, right? Only photosynthesis removes the CO2 from the air. Respiration, combustion, and decomposers all put CO2 back into the air and back into the water. So on your carbon cycle, the reservoir is mostly living and dead organisms. Living and dead organisms, you have them in things like shells and things like that. And the exchange pool is in the atmosphere. I want you to, it's in the notes. CO2, when it dissolves into water, is bicarbonate. It's called bicarbonate. And in fact, when CO2 dissolves into the water of our blood and plasma, it travels as bicarbonate. Now, when you look at this, look at all the things that are contributing to CO2 in the atmosphere: burning of fossil fuels, cellular respiration, decomposers are all increasing it. The only thing that's removing it is plants. So that would be a little signal to me, since we need plants as a source of both food and oxygen, maybe don't cut down so many of them, right? And so on your notes underneath human activities, more CO2 is being released into the environment than can be removed due to the burning of fossil fuels and the destruction of forests. And we know what that can lead to, right? So when we look at what areas are most productive and things that we need to preserve, okay, so we need to talk about GPP, gross primary productivity, and NPP, net primary productivity. So gross primary productivity is all the photosynthesis that plants are doing, right? Because they are fixing CO2 into those sugars. Net is what's left over after the plants meet their own cellular respiration needs. What's left over? What's left over is what you and I are consuming eventually. So you can see here, we're looking at your net primary productivity here and where we have the most amount of either nutrients through food or oxygen production. And you can see the importance of estuaries, swamps, and marshes, which a lot of times people go, not important. And then the tropical rainforest, right? Temperate deciduous forests. These are very, very important to us. Now, when we talk about this on the mean global monthly CO2, look at just from 2009 to 2013 and 14. Remember, the mean, okay, is the average. So the black line right here is the average, okay, and this is actually giving you the spread of data over time. So what are some trends we can see in this graph? So one trend might be that you can see that the CO2 is increasing over time, and it's giving you the monthly mean, but why do you think it fluctuates? You know, there's 12 months in here. Why do you think it fluctuates so much? The reason is that CO2 fluctuates is because whether it's summer or it's winter, because in the summer, right, then that's when you're going to be able to do the most photosynthesis and remove most of the CO2 because you have more light during that time over longer periods of time than in the winter. And so that's why you see it fluctuating. I can't move myself. Oh, there we go. Fluctuating within that graph. Now, as we produce more and more CO2, which we can see in these trend lines, and there's other evidence for that as well, right? Then what's the concern? Well, we have normal warming that's going to occur because you have solar radiation, right? We absorb that. Some of that is reflected back. When it gets reflected back, clouds can re-radiate that back down, which is going to increase the heat, but also greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, they will not allow that energy to get out, so it goes back in, which makes the ground even warmer, which re-radiates it more. And you see how you create this positive feedback loop, not positive like yay, but positive as in more and more and more. And this is what leads to global warming. Okay, so on your notes, the greenhouse effect, excess gases in the environment act like a greenhouse, allowing heat in but cannot escape, and this can impact our global mean temperature. And this, my friends, is global warming. All right. Next cycle, the phosphorus cycle. As I mentioned earlier, the reservoir for phosphorus is in rocks, and then weathering can break it up and get it into the soil and into bodies of water. This is normally a limiting agent. Usually you don't have enough of it, so it kind of keeps everything in check because it's usually immediately removed by autotrophs, and then heterotrophs can eat the autotrophs, etc. Decomposers can return it. Now, where the problem comes up is when we add in excess phosphates, and it no longer now is a limiting factor. And this can lead to algal blooms. I'm going to come back to this slide, but I'm going to show you here is a normal lake, and here is eutrophication with an algal bloom. It wasn't kept in check because man added too many nutrients, and I'll show you how. I'll go back to that other slide, like through fertilizers and animal waste and sewage and runoff. And so now you have algae just growing in these tremendous amounts. So what kind of things add to it? You can see right here. Dissolving nitrogen oxides from internal combustion, discharge treatments, untreated municipal waste from homes, from detergents. You have natural runoff, fine, but then you have additional runoff from manure, runoff from streets, from erosion, etc. Now, why is that a bad thing to have this algal bloom? Well, here's the deal. It's not going to be sustained, more than likely. It also, when each of these plants die, who's going to work on them? Decomposers are going to work on them. What do decomposers do? cellular respiration. What gas do they need? Oxygen. The decomposers will remove all of the oxygen out of this body of water. Who needs the oxygen? Things like fish, right, need that oxygen, and it can ultimately cause death of a lake. Okay, there's a natural process in that, but we throw it off when we put too much in there. So underneath human activities, I already gave you humans can dump large amounts of phosphorus into ecosystems and gave you all of those. But for 2, eutrophication, over-enrichment in bodies of waters leads to an algal blooms, followed by an increase in decomposers, which can ultimately cause a decrease in oxygen content and massive fish kill. So leads to algal blooms, followed by an increase in decomposers working on those algal blooms, decrease in oxygen, and then massive fish kill in that order. All right, yay. All right, next cycle, nitrogen cycle. And I'm going to teach you this one. This is our last cycle. I'm going to teach you this one like I'm peeling back an onion. So I'm going to start real simple. And I'm going to move myself up here, maybe. Yes. Okay, so first of all, breathe in. Breathe out. 78% of the air that went into your lungs was nitrogen gas. You could not do anything with it, and neither can plants when it's going in and out of their stomata. So what you need is nitrogen-fixing bacteria who can take and use the nitrogen in the atmosphere and fix it into a form that plants can use. Then animals can eat the plants, or other animals can eat these animals, and we get nitrogen in our living community. Then decomposers work on the plants and animals, and it can get returned to the soil. There is also denitrifying bacteria that can return it back into the atmosphere. So let me show you again another one. Okay, so notice the pictures up here, and I'm going to kind of peel it back for you here. So you have nitrogen fixation, okay, by nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Now, the way it fixes it, it's still not exactly in the way plants need it. So there's another set of bacteria called nitrifying bacteria who will eventually get it into a form. It'll be ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates that plants can assimilate and use. And like we said, animals can eat the plants, and the decomposers can work on all the living things and return it back to the soil. And then here you can see denitrification. You have bacteria that will return it back to the reservoir, the atmosphere. Now I'm going to peel it back one more time. Hang on, here we go. So follow me through. We got all the levels here. Nitrogen in the air. What did we say? Nitrogen fixing bacteria. They could be in little root nodules in plants, or the nitrogen fixing bacteria. Oh, that sounds like a symbiotic relationship, possibly mutualistic, where the plant provides sugar for the bacteria and the bacteria provides nitrogen for the plant. Yes. Okay. Or nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil. And the first thing they will make is ammonium. So you have nitrogen in the air converted to ammonium. Now, when I think of ammonia, I think like cleaning and scrubbing. So put a pin in that. I'm going to teach you something about that. Then the ammonium is going to be converted to nitrites first, NO2 minus, by nitrifying bacteria, and then other nitrifying bacteria will convert it to nitrates. This is what gets served to plants, and then animals can eat the plants, and then decomposers work on everything, and then it returns it back to the decomposers, look right here, to ammonium again. And then you have denitrifying bacteria who will return it back to the atmosphere. Now, I want to show you one more slide real quick, and that is lightning, and then I'll teach you a little way to remember that. This is called atmospheric fixation. Lightning can fix it as well, and the energy in the lightning, you can form the nitrites, and then eventually other nitrifying bacteria will convert it to nitrates. All right. So knowing that, I'm going to go back to this diagram right here, and I'm going to make myself a little bit bigger because I'm going to teach you a way you will always remember the cycle. So drop your pens, papers, watch me just follow around. So where is the reservoir? The reservoir is in the air for nitrogen, right? You're going to go grab that nitrogen. Nitrogen fixing bacteria, so go grab it. Nitrogen fixing bacteria will convert N2 into ammonium. So I'm like scrubbing ammonium. Then you need nitrifying bacteria to first make nitrite. So we're going to first make nitrite. You see I'm holding up a number 1, and I think of the letter, I'm dotting it, I, nitrite. And then you have more nitrifying bacteria who make nitrate. Now, I don't think they're going to have you memorize. You don't need to know nitrite is NO2 minus and nitrate is NO3 minus. I'm just going to tell you there's another oxygen there. All right, so nitrifying bacteria first, nitrite, and then nitrate. Nitrate, we can serve this up to plants, right? And then animals can eat the plants. And then when the animals and the plants die, decomposers work on them and they convert it back into ammonium. Nitrifying bacteria, first nitrite, then nitrate, and you can serve that up to plants, etc. Now, how else can you get nitrite? Well, you can do and that is lightning or atmospheric fixation. And then the other way is through industrial fixation. So when we're making fertilizers, okay? Now, when we're also here to nitrate, you have denitrifying bacteria, which return it to the atmosphere. All right, so let's go through it all. Here we go. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria convert N2 into ammonia. Then you have nitrifying bacteria, first nitrite, then nitrate, serve it up on a tray to the plants, and then animals can eat the plants, and then the animals and the plants die, and you have decomposers who make it back into ammonium, nitrite, nitrate, and then you have other ways to get nitrate, lightning, atmospheric fixation, or industrial fixation, and then you have denitrifying bacteria, which return it to the atmosphere. Okay, we did it. Good song, good song. So take a look at your notes. Underneath nitrogen cycle, you have nitrogen fixation. You have all the different ways, bacteria, lightning, and industrial. And you have nitrification. I explained how bacteria convert in the nitrifying bacteria, nitrite, and then nitrate, how plants incorporate it, and denitrification. So the only thing we have left is to talk about, let me keep going, we already learned that. This is a good review one if you want to use that one, is how man gets involved in this. So the production of nitrous oxides, bad. That's what you're seeing right here. Okay. And then what can happen, and we get those from fossil fuels and from fertilizers, and this contributes to acid rain. And acid rain and photochemical smog, you can add it on there, contributes to acid rain and photochemical smog and thermal inversions, which is bad for our environment. Right? Pollution, bad. All right. And that is the end. For my students, we have one chapter left. And if you're one of my students, I'll see you in class.